I'm back down to 480p and black and white because my upload speed is still shit and doesn't look like it's ever going to get fixed. So I've got to keep file sizes relatively small for uploads. So sorry, you'll just have to pay attention to the content rather than the visuals. Speaking of which, let's start off a new little series. In my last video, I talked about alternative political systems and the issues that we have with our current system, with the idea that we might think about how, in this day and age, you might create a new political system from the ground up. So let's start that off by considering what it is exactly that's wrong with our current setup. Before you can consider what's wrong, you need to consider what you want. What is the purpose of government? Or at least ideally, what is the purpose of government? Ideally, I would suggest that the purpose of government is to provide society with structure, with the rule of law, with safety, with security, with a common standard, with the ability to come together collectively in order to accomplish and to protect and to nurture each other. So it's family on a larger, broader scale, if you want to consider that. So government is for that purpose, and ideally it should represent and execute the collective will of the people, while also protecting minority views within those people, minority views, minority groups, and so on. That's the difference between democracy and mob rule, is that a democracy has consideration beyond just the will of the absolute majority. So I think that is a reasonable assessment of what the purpose of government is supposed to be. Now, I'm an anarchist, albeit a left anarchist, so I believe that the best form of government would be no government. However, I recognise that this is an impossibly utopian standard, though it's something to consider. You know, the basis of anarchism is voluntarism, which is really the consent of the governed taken to the absolute maximum. So I think that's a big problem that our current system has. Even in the West, we call ourselves democratic, but if you look at any election, often it is a minority of people that actually vote, and of those people it can often be and is often a minority of people within that minority that votes for the party that ends up in power. So just for sake of example, say you've got 3 parties. There's an election. Only 40% of the population turns out. Of that 40%, only 20% vote for the blue party, and 10% vote for the red party, and 10% vote for the yellow party. So you then end up with 80% of the people who didn't vote for the blue party ruled over by the 20% that did. And they're supposed to just go along with it. You know, all the rest of it, well, a lot of people didn't care. Of those that did care, an equal number disagree with the blue party, and yet the blue party is in power. You know, this is an issue, particularly in the US and the UK system. The UK system I know best, so I'd use that as my example. We have a first past the post system, which means in each seat that elects an MP, most people's votes are just wasted. They don't count for anything. I've gone into this in previous videos, and I won't reiterate it exactly, but it's much more likely to turn up a minority consent government. So that's a major problem, is that the ideas represented in government, the ideas executed in government, are not those of usually the majority of the people being governed, who just kind of grumble and consent because maybe next time their party will get into power. You know, that's not really good enough, and it can create the false impression of consent to quite radical agendas by particularly extreme governments that most people just simply don't go along with. That's a key point about governments. Any government, any nation only exists at the sufferance of the governed. You know, the population always hugely outnumbers the ruling class in any system. And whether you gain that consent by democracy or a sham of democracy, and that you people have a say, there'll be another chance in another 4 years to have your say, or whether it's this consent is manufactured through fear or force, any government only exists at the sufferance of its people. But people seem to be willing to put up with a great deal. And that's another problem. That doesn't incentivize even democratic governments to really respond to the will of the people. We also have a problem in that wealth can distort everything. Our electoral systems now, our party systems are so tied into finance. There have been studies done that show that the governments in power do not really respond to what the people want. They respond to what their donors want. They respond to what large financial corporations and so on that give them money do. In the UK, once a politician's out of power, he'll make money on speaking engagements, but will also often end up on the board of companies, and these companies are often companies that donate large amounts of money to their political parties, at whatever level. I mean, at least the appearance of corruption, if not actual corruption, is there, and it shouldn't be. And it's not like MPs aren't reasonably salaried at all. It's just this position puts them in a position to make more money. And in the US, I mean, standing for president or whatever is ruinously expensive. You will never get, an ordinary person, however qualified, will never be able to stand. It guarantees that there is a corrupting influence there. So that's another major problem. Yet another problem with our systems is that they reward and give power to people who often know fuck all about what they're making decisions over, and ignoring expert advice. Again, I know the UK best, so this is what I can particularly point to. But we've had health secretaries who believe in homeopathy or who believe in astrology and nonsense like that with no medical training or experience whatsoever. We have a drug policy that has explicitly gone against the advice of experts. It's career politicians that get into positions of power. It's not necessarily, it's often not even remotely people who know anything about the arenas in which they're making decisions. At best, maybe quite a lot of them have trained as lawyers, so maybe they know something about law, how that'll play out. But you don't really tend to get economists in charge of the economy. You don't tend to get doctors in charge of health. You don't tend to get former soldiers in charge of the Ministry of Defense. You do not get experts. You get grey men in suits. And that does not bode well, really, does it? You don't have the people who know the most and can make the best, most informed decisions in political positions of power. And while they will go through a facade of consulting experts, they often just completely ignore them, either because the public will goes against the experts, in which case the position of a leader should be to lead and educate and inform, or because they ideologically disagree with it, and it doesn't seem to matter how many times things go wrong, they continue to go against it. Now, this isn't only a problem at the level of politics. We're often, as the people, asked to make decisions about things we know fuck all about. If you look at the last couple of referenda we had in the UK, one was over changing the political voting system, which would have made it vastly more democratic. But the campaign was shit. People weren't informed of how this change could be. It wasn't the kind of change that a lot of people wanted, so people voted against it. And then you look at Brexit, people went completely against all the expert opinion, and it's causing our country huge amounts of problems. A decent democracy relies upon an informed populace to make the votes, to make a decision on an informed basis, and we don't live in an age where that's a thing. We live in an age of disinformation and no information, and forced ignorance, or just people don't have the time or the expertise to make an informed decision. So should they be able to make that decision? Well, that's I guess gonna be my ending point for this video. So any form of government, it exists in a tension between two things. Should it be representative or should it be effective? So the most effective possible form of government you might be able to think of would be an enlightened dictatorship, a kind dictatorship. Absolute power resting in someone who, for some reason, genuinely has people's concerns at heart. I don't think that's ever going to happen. On the other side, you have mob rule. Whatever the majority wants, they get. And given that you have a largely uninformed populace, that would be very bad for a lot of minorities, for a whole number of people. That would be an issue. So the balance has to lie somewhere in between. You need a government that is responsive to the will of the people, but then executes that will in the most effective manner, and even goes against that will if from a more informed position they genuinely know better. So we've identified what ideally a government is for. We've identified many, if not all, of the issues with our current forms of governance. So now we can start to think in the next video of how we might address these problems or construct a government that overcomes these issues. I look forward to seeing any ideas in the comments. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachew, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachew.